It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. D-Day at 80. Leaders gather in Normandy to commemorate the landings. National service in the 1950s. Do we need something similar today? Also on the programme,
he would put up everyone's taxes by £2,000. £2,000 in higher taxes for every working family.
The Prime Minister, with his back against the wall, desperately lashing out and resorting to lies.
the Tory-Labour tax row rumbles on. Wales's First Minister loses a confidence vote. Can he survive in office? And the Conservatives accepted another donation from Frank Hester after he'd been accused of making racist remarks. With me today, Conservative peer Ed Vaizey, Labour's Seema Malhotra, Naomi Smith from the campaign group Best for Britain and former Brexit Party MEP and now member of the House of Lords, Claire Fox. This is Politics Live Election 2024. Yes, welcome. It's a slightly quieter day on the election campaign trail because of the commemorations that are happening here in France, you can see there, and in the UK. That is the British Normandy Memorial, looking very striking there against the blue sky and in the sunshine. King Charles, with other dignitaries, going to lay a wreath at that memorial for the fallen from the D-Day landings, when tens of thousands of soldiers landed on 5 beaches in Normandy, northern France, at the start of what turned the tide of the war and led to the eventual defeat of the Nazis and liberated northwestern Europe. Being hosted there to some extent by the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, being joined by his wife, the First Lady of France, Brigitte, and the Prime Minister there, Rishi Sunak, also going forward to lay a wreath. We can see here Joe Biden, the American president, also joining world leaders, gathering there in Normandy, and there will be all sorts of events taking place throughout the day. The veterans themselves have been gathered there, and we heard very moving words, their recollections, their memories earlier on this morning, read out by others, and of course a far smaller number as the years go by. But that is where world leaders have gathered today, and it's a world away, of course, from the election campaign here in so many ways. But we will return to the election campaign because, as you heard in the headlines, the row of attacks continues to rumble on, following on from that head-to-head leaders debate earlier in the week, with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, issuing a challenge to Labour in today's Telegraph newspaper. We can show you here the headline. It says, Hunt issues challenge to Starmer over taxes on property. Ed Vaizey, was there ever a suggestion that the Tories would raise any of these taxes that they're talking about? Capital gains tax on a primary property, a re-evaluation of council tax or stamp duty?
Well, this is pure politics. It's been going on for 40 years. The Treasury did this under Margaret Thatcher in 1985. They worked out that they could ask Treasury civil servants to cost the opposition policies by pretending it was their own policy, and every party's done it ever since. But
does that make it right?
I don't think. Well, it depends what you mean by right, obviously. Is it good politics or not? And the Tories would say, well, we've got it into people's heads that Labour are raising taxes because that's what Labour governments do. Labour has fought back by effectively calling the Prime Minister a liar and saying misleading. I was musing about this morning. You know, the average voter, what message will stay? For me, the message that's got through is that what the Prime Minister put forward was misleading. But I also accept that the message that may have got through to the vast majority of voters is if you vote Labour, your taxes are going to go up, and the Tories would be very pleased if that is the message that's got through.
Well, of course, that was the aim, as you said. But before we get on to that sort of broader argument with our other guests, Seema, will Labour rule out any increases to capital gains tax, stamp duty or council tax bans?
Well, Joe, you won't be surprised that the answer is the same as before the election and everything we've said in the election, which is that all our plans are fully costed. We don't see any reason to be raising other taxes, and we have committed to not raising income tax, national insurance, and VAT. And I just want to make this point because what has happened since the debate is that Rishi Sunak has been shown to be a liar on his comments around Labour's tax on boats, on NHS figures. I don't think the Tories can be trusted at all on anything to do with tax, whether it's what they do and their record or the Labour Party. And the reason being as well that taxes are at their highest level for 70 years. I think they need to be more honest about that.
I will put that back to Ed Vaizey, but can you categorically rule out increases in taxes, not on working households, which I think is the phraseology that Labour has used, but on, broadly, property taxes?
Well, this is what Rachel and Keir have been saying, that we are not raising taxes. We haven't had any reason to, because
specifically capital gains tax, council tax bans, or stamp duty.
Because the choices we're making, as you know, are to deal with the loopholes in the non-dom
well, let
tax.
me just show you the headline here in The Guardian.
The three areas, the non-dom tax, the windfall tax on oil and gas giants, and also VAT on private schools.
Let me just show you this. Rachel Reeves under pressure from shadow ministers to raise capital gains tax to revive public services. I'm not making a comment about whether it's right or wrong, but you can quite see, while there may be some of your colleagues who want to see more money coming in, to go into public services.
There have been a lot of colleagues who want to see quite a lot of things, and I think we're very clear on making sure that we go into the election and to be clear with the British public about where we would make different choices on taxes, and we have made those very clear, as I've just said.
Ed Vaizey, you mentioned that this is time immemorial. 'Twas ever thus, a row over tax from the Conservative side, saying that Labour always raises taxes. The difference this time is, as Seema has said, is that we've got the highest tax burden we've had on record. Freezing tax thresholds has meant that far more people are paying far more tax. So I put it to you, how can a campaign about Labour raising taxes work?
Well, you could put it to me. I mean, I'm not here to be a spokesman for the Tory government. I mean, I think that it's a very difficult argument for them to run. Indeed, the right-wing
But you do, I think, when I last looked, represent the Conservatives in the House of Lords.
No, I take the Conservative whip in the House of Lords, but I'm not a government minister.
No.
And I support Conservative principles, but I don't obviously support the loony Brexit road that the Tories have gone down. And in fact, I use the loony border controls that the Brexiteers have imposed on us as a good example of why this is a pointless debate. We've just apparently spent £5 billion on border controls near Dover. Governments will always find the money for the things they have to spend money on. Taxes have gone up because of COVID, and they've gone up because of the recession. The Tories instinctively, the reason I am a Tory is because instinctively we are
I've almost forgotten
a party that would like to reduce taxes where we can.
All right.
But I find the whole tax cutting debate completely pointless because people forget Margaret Thatcher raised taxes in the early 80s in order to stabilise the economy, as she saw it.
Yes.
And only reduced taxes quite late in her premiership.
I mean, you have called Rishi Sunak a liar on this programme, so you're obviously happy, because I've only heard people saying he lied over this. But let me just show you the Labour Party tweet, which has been very clear. Rishi Sunak lied to you about NHS waiting lists, about small boats, about the cost of living, just as he did about Partygate. He's a liar, with a helpful explanation as to what the word means. Why are you going so hard on Rishi Sunak being a liar?
This is about honesty and about character. And when you hear that the former permanent secretary of the Treasury is saying that numbers shouldn't be used in this way, when you hear experts from the Resolution Foundation saying that the analysis should never have been used, when you hear Robert Chope saying that
from the Statistics Authority,
from the Statistics Authority, exactly, saying that you should lay out your methodology and how you're using figures. This is really important generally in public policy and from a government.
So are you saying Rishi Sunak is a liar?
We are saying he is a liar because he would have known that Treasury civil servants were not the ones producing these figures. It was Tory special advisers, and he should not have talked about that, and nor should his cabinet have talked about that. They were lying.
All right. Let me bring in our other guests. Does it work? Does it work, this sort of tax row in the heat of a campaign? Listening to both Ed Vaizey and Seema Malhotra, I take your point that you think it's pointless. But does it work in terms of getting that message through? Labour will raise your taxes. The Prime Minister's lied.
I think it is so boring that we are in yet another British election where a lie is going to be dominated in the discourse and perpetuated on programmes like this and all around the media. It was a lie. He's been found out to have lied about whether or not the Treasury signed off on it or not. And it's like their new version of the 350 million on the side of the bus that the Leave campaign ran with back in 2016. It's like Nigel Farage's Breaking Point poster saying that hordes of Turkish people were about to enter the UK if we stayed in the EU. I think the British public are really bored of it. They can see through it now. They've been sold too many of these and they can sniff it out when it comes along.
Well, since Naomi mentioned the £350 million on the side of the bus, deemed to be very successful, if not true, deemed to be very successful in a campaign. Do you think it can work in this case again, Claire, in terms of tax?
I never thought it was the deciding factor in Brexit. I don't particularly want to everybody else seems to want to have the Brexit row. I'm not going to do that. But I did want to say something more broadly, which is I think the greatest problem that all of us face in this election is disenchantment with the political process and with the political parties in general. I think that there is a real danger of narrowing down what should be a very serious discussion about the perils that we face in terms of the economy to a narrow technocratic argument about tax. And I actually think it's rather unedifying, everybody shouting liar at each other. I saw a very amusing video yesterday, credit to journalist Tom Slater for bringing it out, on Keir Starmer's inconsistencies over the last 3 years. And it's very funny. They've got the receipts and the films, you know, on everything from overthrowing the Brexit referendum to what is a woman, to a range of things, right? And it's very funny. And one of the things is you think, is this a consistent politician that you can trust? I would say not particularly. But what I'm trying to say about that is I don't know that the way that this election being fought is to shout liar, liar, pants on fire at each other is helpful. And I also don't think that if you really believe that the only thing that the voters of this country are interested in are the pounds and pennies in their pocket only, in a kind of narrow technical way around how much tax you're going to get back. People feel as though we have not got a country with economic dynamism. There's all sorts of problems we have to confront. Right. And therefore, I think this is misassessing what the voters are interested in.
Seema?
Rishi Sunak knows that he is now up against a changed Labour Party. And I think the debate was very important for this reason, that Rishi Sunak used it to basically be dishonest about Labour's tax plans, when in reality what people want to be talking about are the challenges with the NHS, are the challenges with their children's education, are the challenges with safety in our communities and the more police that we need, are the challenges with how we really need to deal with immigration and have those controls over our borders, and also energy prices. And
that's what Claire was also saying. Is it edifying to be calling the Prime Minister a liar?
I think what's important is to make sure there's honesty in politics. And when you are attacked as a party for something that is not honest, it's important to expose that. Rishi Sunak set this out and set the tone of that. He could have made a different choice to use the debate to be more about substance. Because he's so afraid of talking about his own record and that of the last 14 years, he had to resort to this. And I think it is just scrabbling in the sort of pit of just a sort of low blows, and it's totally wrong.
Is it desperation, Ed?
It is absolutely desperation.
I don't think it's desperation. I mean, it's a card that is going to be played in every single election. It'll probably continue to be played, and our grandchildren will be on this programme talking about the latest attack during an election on tax rises. It's inevitable. It's inevitably the Conservatives are going to play this card, because whether Seema agrees or not, that is Labour's reputation in the public mind when people are deciding whether to vote. And it's inevitable, given that apparently Keir Starmer didn't rebut it effectively during the debate, that Labour will seek to close it down. So the question, this is purely a question, really, I mean, I'm sorry to sound utterly cynical, of political tactics. Will the £2,000 cut through with the public, or have Labour closed it down sufficiently by saying liar a lot in the last 2 days and effectively trying to seize the agenda? That is the big debate. But there will continue to be attack. I am so boring. I'm almost as boring as Claire, that I would much prefer to have debate about tax simplification. That's what I'm obsessed by.
Well, we can always come on to your pet
I'm
subjects in a
afraid
minute,
that
but
doesn't
let me-
bring people out on the street.
Let me just show
Tax
you this.
simplification, when do we want it? Now. It's
Well-
not a particularly resonant cry.
Well, ironically, this in The Spectator from Fraser Nelson. On Sunak's maths, Tories will lift taxes by £3,000 per household. Not to be outdone, I should say. If you apply their methodology, he said, to their own published tax plans, it works out at a £3,000 tax rise. Might that worry people?
Well, that's right. I mentioned it in the opening salvo, as it were, that Fraser Nelson of The Spectator had made this point. And I think, but the point I kind of extrapolate from that is that this is a completely, I was going to say academic, that edifies it too much. It's a completely theoretical debate because governments will be faced with what governments are faced with after the election. They will either have to raise taxes to deal with it or cut public services
Well,
to deal
let's
with
come
it,
on to
or
that.
focus on growth to deal with it.
Let's come on to that because the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, have called it a conspiracy of silence from both the main parties, not really setting out the choices, which both of you have outlined. We've got a campaign at the BBC running at the moment called Your Voice, Your Vote, encouraging people, the voting public, to write in with questions. And someone has written in saying all parties, Susan Taylor, all parties are keen to tell voters what they aim to do, but we all know there isn't the money to do everything. So my question to all parties is, what will you not do, Seema?
Well, we've said very clearly that we won't be raising those three main taxes on working people, so it's income tax, national insurance and VAT.
What aren't you going to be spending money on?
But we... in terms of what we're not spending money on, I think we've been very clear about
what are we going to do less of in order? Because you want to keep taxes, you don't want to raise taxes. So what are you going to do less of?
Yeah, well, we don't want to see spending cuts, and I think that Rachel's already made that clear as well. I think the point is about how we can invest with what we can afford to do as first steps, and that's really what this election is about. It's recognising that we're going to need to have the first step is stability. We're going to need stability in our economy, and we're then going to need to invest what we can afford to do. And that's why
there's no. All right, that's fair enough. But specifically, there's nothing there that is going to be less of. We're going to do less of, and the Conservatives haven't said that they would rule out further cuts in spending on public services, have you? That's the corollary of keeping taxes the same.
Yeah, and I think Claire's point is very well made earlier on, which is, and it's kind of reflected in this discussion, which is the really big issues this country faces are not being debated. We're having, in some respects, a very traditional and slightly dull election campaign when the country is facing some of the biggest challenges it's faced for
both the parties
many years.
seem to agree, broadly speaking. I mean, is there a public appetite? Is there a public appetite for higher taxes to fund public services?
Well, Ipsos this morning have got polling out saying that even Conservative voters think that public services have deteriorated over the last 14 years of Conservative government. So there is an appetite out there hugely, as Claire mentioned, as Ed also mentioned, for an improvement in public services. It's not just the cost of living crisis that people are concerned about in this election. They really want to be able to get a GP appointment to make sure that an NHS waiting list has come down. They're not going to die before they're operated on. Those real issues that matter to people. But on what I really hope the next government doesn't spend money on, at Best for Britain we've been running a scandalous spending tracker, and it topped out at £131 billion of scandalous spending on crony contracts, on duff deals, on projects that never went anywhere. All of those sorts of things. I mean, that is an extortionate amount of money that has just been squandered. You can look at the totals on our website. We've got all the detail in there. And I would really hope that that would mean that if we weren't wasting all of that money, then the whole issue of tax and spend wouldn't even need to be debated because the money would be there to fund all this stuff.
I think that you were suggesting that, that both parties tend to agree on this. And one of the problems is that this has become already a row between, it's like a political row between forecasters and statisticians. I mean, I can't imagine anything more uninspiring. No. And the idea that everyone's going, look at this and look at that. In a more substantial sense, there are going to have to be, I believe that you should look the British public in the eye and say, we won't be able to do this, we won't be able to do that. I think that's true. I did think that it was very important to note that point about Wes Streeting, for example. He's a reformer, yes, and he does rightly say throwing money at things is not necessarily the way to go. And I think that a lot of public services have squandered huge amounts of money. In fact, the Conservatives have also made the point, and this is a reasonable point as well, which is if you cut out the bureaucrats of most public services, and God knows, so much is spent on regulators and bureaucrats and managers and nothing to do with frontline services, then we would be in a better place. I've just been talking to people about prisons, and you just think, God, somebody just needs to reform prisons. A sensible thing. It's not a financial problem.
This is important, and this is why, as if we do need an Office for Value for Money that we've laid out. We do need to make sure that the money that should be paid back to the taxpayer for those crony PPE contracts, as one example, is paid back. We also need to make sure that we grow the economy. This is also a dividing line in the election, because if you've got investment lined up, but you have a plan for growth. I mean, why haven't the government had an industrial strategy for years? A plan for growth and a plan for investment, and the government investing alongside business with the National Wealth Fund. Those are huge game changers for generations to come.
All right, let's just have a look at this headline. BBC News. This is about donations broadly, but in particular to the Conservatives in this case. Tories given £5 million more by Hester before Abbott row. Now, you may remember earlier in the year that they had already received £10 million from Frank Hester, who became embroiled in a row over comments he was reported to have made racist and dangerous comments about the Labour politician Diane Abbott. But we didn't know whether another £5 million had been received by the party until the Electoral Commission published it this morning. Now, we also know that another £150,000 was accepted from Frank Hester in March, and this was a few days after the story broke. Was it right, Ed Vaizey, for the Conservatives to accept that further donation after the comments emerged?
Well, it doesn't look great. I mean, his comments were completely outrageous and unacceptable, but the Tories will say this is transparent, these donations are declared. You can take a view on whether we are right or not to accept the donations. This man apologised.
Yes, and your view is, because I'm the interviewer, so what's your view? Should they have accepted this money knowing what he had said?
I don't have a particular problem with them accepting that money now.
You don't? So you don't think they should have handed it back, any of it?
No.
And none of it? Diane Abbott has responded with this. Rishi Sunak belatedly admitted Frank Hester's remarks that I made him hate all black women and should be shot were racist. Now it turns out Sunak accepted a further £5 million from him, an insult to me and all black women. Is she right?
Well, that's her view, and she's expressed it very strongly. And Diane Abbott has been in the news for a week now because the Labour Party's bent over backwards to try and deselect her and been forced to accept her.
Well, we're going to come on to
selection. I think
selection.
It's a great thing that Diane Abbott is standing in the selection. I think she's a role model and a pioneer, and I think Frank Hester's comments were unacceptable.
Right, should the party have handed back the money? Now, we know they accepted even more, a smaller amount admittedly, after it had been revealed what Frank Hester had said.
I think it is outrageous to take money from somebody that makes such blatantly racist comments, and to take more money after knowing that he'd done it, I think tells us everything we need to know about the values of the Conservative Party.
Claire?
Well, people make their own decisions, but I am generally opposed to purity tests on donations, and I would like to go through every single penny that every single political party's got and to see whether it would pass the test. I'm particularly incensed because at the moment every book festival in the country has lost its funding because of a purity test set up by some numpties who decided that any...
Bailey Gifford.
Not Bailey Gifford aren't the numpties.
They're the people...
Bailey Gifford were the company. All I'm saying is you can go too far. And we just talked about crony contracts, and you mentioned in the introduction, just so that we don't kind of get too self-righteous and high-minded about this. I'm from Wales and therefore have been following very carefully the crony contract saga of the person who runs Welsh...
Claire, you predicted what we were going to ask next, because that is
related.
Well, let's ask Seema, because Vaughan Gething, the Labour's First Minister in Wales, lost a vote of confidence. We can see pictures of him yesterday. He was very upset about what went on yesterday, but he said he's going to carry on. It was partly because of a £200,000 donation from a company run by businessman David Neil, who was twice convicted for environmental offences. Should he step down, Seema?
If I could just make a comment about Frank Hester first, because I do think that people are really shocked by that further £5 million, and I do think it comes back down to a question of character of the Prime Minister, especially after he did admit that those comments were racist and were actually encouraging violence against Diane Abbott.
Claire Fox has suggested a bad idea when it comes and you look at donations accepted by all political parties.
Well, this is where it is a question about values of the parties.
Should he step down for having accepted that donation from someone who's been
with Vaughan, I think this is a really important one, because we do know that this was a gimmick, essentially, by the Tories and supported by Plaid Cymru. And when you hear that the long-standing agreements that there are between the parties, where you have pairing if somebody's away for sickness, doesn't apply in particular vote, you do wonder about what the games are that are being played. And this is a vote that that wasn't binding. And I think in large respects, it's a distraction from what the discussion in an election should be about, whether it's about the cost of living crisis or indeed about why we need to change government in Westminster.
Right. I said we were going to return to issues of defence and security broadly. But first of all, one story that has certainly garnered a lot of attention and cut through with the public on both sides of the debate is the plan for mandatory national service that was announced at the beginning of the campaign by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Again, as part of Your Voice, Your Vote, we've had a lot of contributions asking questions around this, and you can email BBC Your Voice at bbc.co.uk if you would like to continue to contribute to this debate. We're joined by two young people on this issue. 15-year-old Oscar is in Manchester. He's a member of Young Conservatives, and 18-year-old Samir is in northwest London. Welcome to both of you. Oscar, let's start with you. You're in favour of national service. Why?
Yeah, so when the Prime Minister announced the national service to be reintroduced, I thought it would be a really good idea, because I know a lot of families say that their young people are not getting opportunities, and I think to bring something like this back into the country, I think it's really, really positive. I think it'll bring a sense of pride to the country. Because a lot of young people, I'd say, tend towards the left of the political spectrum, and I think people just presume straight away that it's going to be about the military conscription and sending their children to war, which isn't the case.
Samir, you're against the plan. Why?
I'm against the plan for so many different reasons. If I give you all of them, we'd be here for a very long time.
Well, pick a few.
Yeah, I'm going to pick a few now. So the first reason is that the needs of young people aren't being prioritised here, and the governments are putting their interests over the best interests of young people. According to statistics published by the House of Lords, between the years 2022 to 2023, 4.3 million young people were living in poverty. And if you were to ask young people whether they'd like to see investment into children that are living in poverty, who are quite literally starving on a day-to-day basis, or into a scheme which hasn't been thought out correctly, and which would supposedly provide young people with skills that they could easily gain in a school or college environment, I think we'd all know what young people would pick.
All right. Well, Oscar, Oscar, what do you say in response to Samir, that this is not exactly a priority for young people, many of whom are really struggling?
Well, I think there's a lot.
Oh, you've just frozen, Oscar. We'll try and... hang on, Oscar. Let's try again. You were just frozen and we missed what you said at the beginning. So you were going to respond to Samir. Oh, no, looks like you've frozen.
Yeah,
I
think the country has a lot of things that it needs to work on. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think the country has a lot of issues that needs to be resolved. But I think a lot of young people like Samir, who are more towards the left of the political spectrum, will obviously say that this isn't a good idea. But, we've not even tried it yet. And they're not even giving the government a chance to try this. If it fails, it fails. But, at least give it a chance. I think, a lot of people are living in poverty. But at the same time, a lot of people are stating that young people and people that turn after 18 don't have any opportunities. So this will give those young people that don't have any opportunities and bring back to the country. And actually, it's not conscription. And I think it's really positive.
Let me put that back to Samir, because I understand, Samir, you've done quite a bit of volunteering. Isn't there a merit in introducing a scheme that would make volunteering a part of young people's life and also make them proud of the communities that they live in?
I definitely agree with that aspect of volunteering, but volunteering is something that people should do out of their own goodwill. It shouldn't be something that's forced upon young people, especially if they don't want to engage in volunteering. And as you mentioned, I myself have volunteered for Moorfields Eye Hospital for several months last year, and I volunteered for my local youth council for the past 3.5 years, and it's been such a rewarding experience. However, if young people are forced to do something which they clearly do not want to do, then volunteering will lose its meaning of being a rewarding experience.
Samir, have you spoken to your peers about the plan? Do they feel like you?
Yes, exactly. So a lot of 18-year-olds, including myself, we work part-time jobs where we are able to develop our skills and gain the skills which the government are proposing. This scheme will improve or help us develop.
Right.
And if we're being forced to...
Sorry, yes, Oscar, do you want to respond? This idea of compulsion, it's true, the plan hasn't exactly been worked through in detail, but what do you think about the sort of mandatory nature or compelling young people to do it?
Well, I know the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, also told the public that it isn't going to be, you're going to go to jail for not abiding by this compulsory plan. But you know, I just think it's just a lot of opportunities will open with this plan. And, you know, there is other things that the money could go to, you know, necessarily. He's speaking about poverty. And,
all right, I'm going to come in, Oscar, because your line is a little bit unstable, and I think the panel is struggling slightly to hear you. But thank you both to Oscar and Samir. Claire, first of all, what's your reaction to the plan overall and listening to the two young men?
So I think that the notion of trying to encourage new generations to have a sense of duty and to have a sense of committing to something beyond themselves has something in it. We live in a period of complete fragmentation and a lack of social cohesion. Many young people are confused about the history of the country we live in under the popularity, let us say, of decolonisation and attacking practically every aspect of history from the point of view of a criticism. And this is very poignant because we're on D-Day. And I think that there we've seen an example of young people who were forced to fight for the country that they lived in. And it was both tragic and humbling and important and a fight for freedom. I don't think this particular plan that was put forward has been worked through. I just don't want to simply dismiss it in a way that has been suggested, because I think that people who say, and of course, if you ask, perfectly reasonably, you ask young 18-year-olds, you know, would you like to do something that we've suggested to you? They're probably going to go no. But you can encourage young people to see a different way. And as Samir rightly pointed out, many young people will indeed do voluntary work, but we are literally in a fragmented, divisive society. And I want to bring people together around a bigger picture.
Well, will that do it, Naomi?
No, because this is a very discriminatory, ageist policy. It's yet another attempt to claw back desperately some voters, older voters, those that might be tempted to vote for reform rather than the Conservatives. It's another gimmick, a bit like attacking Starmer over the £2,000 tax thing that was a lie. Young people have already sacrificed a huge amount. Look what they did during COVID. They gave up education, they gave up experiences at college and university to protect our elderly and our vulnerable. The notion that young Brits don't have a sense of civic duty, that don't care about their communities and participate in them is for the birds. Under the last 14 years of government, what has happened for young people? We have got rents that are now totally unaffordable for them, let alone the dream of ever having a stake in capitalism by having home ownership. Tuition fees at an all-time high. The hardest of Brexits, meaning that they don't have the freedom to travel, study, work and live in 27 other countries. Young people have been let down by repeated governments, but particularly over the last 14 years. If you want them to defend society, then you need to give them a stake in it. What are they offering? Nothing. At least the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens are offering them votes at 16.
All right.
Conservative Party not offering them anything, but potentially punishing them with mandatory volunteering.
Claire, do you
or
want to
national
respond,
service.
and then I'll come to the politics?
Very, very quickly to say, of course, it's true that all of the issues that you've raised, like housing opportunities, are hugely important. But there is a cultural question that we need to confront. And I simply think, actually, when we talked about lockdown, I think that young people were betrayed. It wasn't that they voluntarily gave up for the sake of duty. They were actually sold out by politicians on all sides. The closure of the schools, they were told that they would kill granny if they left the house. And the interesting thing about volunteering was the government actually sensibly said, would anyone like, at the beginning of lockdown, would anyone like to volunteer to maybe help? Tens of thousands of people, both young and old, actually volunteered, and then the government never emailed them or contacted them, and they were confined to their barracks.
Young and old, but what are older people being asked to do in return?
Too cynical
Why
about...
can't older people?
I find everything
everything
that Claire says just fills me with utter and complete despair.
Why?
Because the reason I don't like the national service policy, regardless of the detail, is it represents, does a party look forward or does it look back? And national service is some kind of cod shorthand for a golden age in the 1950s when everyone did their duty. Are you really saying... Can I just finish? Are you really saying that Oscar and Samir, if they'd been born in 1925 instead of 2005, would not have done their duty in the Second World War? They're filled with as much courage and fear as the young men who went on the beaches in D-Day. And I'm fed up with people slagging off the younger generation and saying that they wouldn't be, they're not the same stock as the people who defended our freedom. They're exactly the same stock. You've heard Samir talk. You've heard Samir talk about his volunteering, the work he does in his community. This country is filled with amazing young people doing remarkable things. And the trouble for the Tories, you know, they could have talked, the Army Reserves have been transformed by the Conservatives. It's a fantastic thing. We set up the National Citizen Service.
Well, that was under David Cameron.
So what? That's a fantastic thing. And yet we come out with this policy with national service where the subtext is we prefer the 1950s and the subtext is we don't like young people. It's crazy selling of policy.
Well, hang on. Ed has made his views very clear. But hang on.
Decolonisation is her argument.
Well, Seema, why is Labour against it in principle? I mean, you heard Oscar saying he thinks it's a good idea.
There are two very, very important separate issues that the Tories have utterly confused in this policy. The first is about the importance of investing in our young people, and I pay tribute to Oscar and Samir because clearly they're both very thoughtful and articulate and making their huge commitment themselves already, as are many in my constituency, to their local area. I do think this question about investment in young people is fundamental because it should be the responsibility of government to do that. But if you look at the government's record, whether that is the cuts to youth funding, or it is the stopping work experience being compulsory, or it is the drop in apprenticeships that we've seen, over 200,000 since 2017, or it is the rise in mental health and the lack of support. There is opportunity that has been pulled away from young people. And that is why that's a separate question to how we also deal with our hollowed out armed forces, which is a major issue. We've got the smallest size of our armed forces
because there is a little bit,
but
there's a little bit of division here in terms of the government having committed under Rishi Sunak to 2.5% spending on defence out of our national income by 2030, and Labour who won't put a time on it. Now, we don't know how the Conservatives would fund that, by the way, but you haven't put a time on it.
We have said we want to work towards that, as you know, and we have said that we would do that with a strategic defence review. But the important thing is also that you cannot expect young people to be filling on the cheap some of the issues in some of the areas of workforce shortage in our armed forces. If they do go into our armed forces, they need to be supported to do so with the right level of management.
Let me say goodbye to Oscar and Samir, who've been listening very patiently. We would like to go back to them, but I think the line is still a little bit unstable.
I think young people need infrastructure spending on broadband. more
well,
than they need
It's
compulsory
not
national
just
Labour's
service.
broadband in Manchester that's undermined Oscar. I was
But it's
pleased
in-
to see there's a Tory in Manchester. though.
Well, I think there's more than one Tory in
But
Manchester,
you've
I'm
got
sure.
to also, the question about this is also asking what are the Tories not funding in order to do this, which is the Towns funding,
Well, that's-
and also the non-dom tax funding, which is what Labour would be using to cut our NHS
All right,
wait
before
lists as well.
before we carry on, we're going to move on to the next subject. In the Times, Tory grassroots fury as party chairman parachuted into safe seats. Now, of course, the snap election called by Rishi Sunak seemed to catch a lot of people on the hop, including many Conservative associations, because they've been scrabbling around trying to fill about 200 seats or so. And the Labour Party, too, has had its problems, as we know, with Diane Abbott in terms of how they've dealt with her, and Faiza Shaheen, another potential candidate. She is not standing for Labour anymore. But let's focus on what has happened with Richard Holden, the Tory party chairman, because he's been selected at the last minute as Conservative Party candidate for Basildon and Billericay, regarded as a safe seat because his old seat in Durham doesn't exist anymore under the new boundaries. Now, the chairman of the local association said they'd expected a short list of candidates, but was told they wouldn't get a choice. Ed Vaizey, Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chairman, has been unanimously selected by a committee of one, as there was no other candidate put forward, and he was the only candidate. What's going on?
Great, fantastic. Need the party chairman back in Parliament. Give him a safe seat.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
so you're
I mean,
pleased.
I think there should be much more ruthless central control of the selection of candidates by both parties. I mean, I think you look at some of the people who get selected and then get elected to Parliament for either party, and you think, my God, sleep at the wheel. Let's have some more central control, vet these people properly, and get people who've got proper views.
So is that what you would say to, I think it's the chairman of the local association, who said they were worried because they weren't sure that Richard Holden shared the values? The Conservative Party chairman didn't share the values of the Conservative Association in Essex. What do you
I don't know what he means by that. I mean, Richard Holden's clearly an effective Conservative and effective member of Parliament, and Billericay would be thrilled to have him.
Right, well, let's just show you the other candidates standing in Basildon and Billericay. You can see there on your screen. Is there, though, a risk that you lose the support of local activists if you continue, as you say, with more centralised control of selection?
No.
Oh, you've said that very confidently.
I don't think you'd lose the support of local activists. I think local activists, campaign for a national government, and most local voters also go out in general election and they vote for the Conservative candidate. I worked very hard in my seat.
I mean, in reality, come on, in reality, this is like the latest in the story of chaos since day one of the election. Because
Seema,
honestly,
what about Diane Abbott and the way
on
You
this,
can't
no,
do
I
this
can
with a straight
absolutely
face. You
because
can't do this
if
with a
you,
straight
I
face.
tell you the question on my mind is, did Rishi Sunak
I'll tell you
not
the
tell
no,
his
I'll tell you the
party
question.
chairman
Well, never mind
that there
about-
was going to be an
I've done
election
that
and that
with
he ought to
Ed-
find
yeah,
a
I
seat?
did that with
I mean,
Ed
it's
Vaizey. But let's talk
extraordinary.
about Labour, because it has been chaos in terms of the way they actually dealt with Diane Abbott. Now, it has been resolved finally, and she is standing in the election. But there was also Faiza Shaheen. We can show her tweet. She's standing as an independent candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green at the general election on the 4th of July. And she said, I've reached that decision following hundreds of messages from people in my community who say there was no option left for them. They're tired of the Tories, but now feel they can't trust Labour. And that's because she was blocked from standing and assumed she would be. What's gone
In
wrong?
large part, the Tories have been way behind Labour on having candidates ready for selection,
answer
because
my
we've been
question
working
about
on
the way you've
for a long
treated,
time. But I will
Faiza
say
Shaheen and
this:
Diane
I will
Abbott.
say this, that on Diane, I'm glad that is resolved, and I think it is right that she's standing again for election. She is a trailblazer, and I have huge respect for
Was
for what
Faiza
she's
Shaheen
achieved. Pardon.
treated
And
badly?
on Faiza Shaheen, I don't know about the detail of the process. What I would say is I do think it is important that you have high standards that all candidates need to meet, so that when people are going to the country as Labour candidates, the residents can have confidence that they have been through a process
So you don't think she
that
was
has
treated
the
badly? You
highest.
think she
So
was treated fairly?
I think she was treated. I think she would have treated as anybody else was during the process, and I wasn't involved, obviously. And
All
I
right,
think
well, let
that's
me just show you the
important.
list of candidates in Chingford and Woodford Green. There they are on the screen. I know Naomi and Claire are desperate to get in
I just
briefly,
wanted to
because
say-
we've only got a minute.
The parties have become completely hollowed out in terms of activism. The NEC of the Labour Party have literally got rid of whole swathes of local candidates and imposed NEC members in. As it happens, this is an approach that Ed Vaizey rather likes. I think you should at least own up to it.
All right,
It's
well,
not
let
just a-
Naomi,
Well,
let Naomi
But
have
the
her
main
say in the
problem
last few
is that
seconds.
what's the point? This is the unedifying bit. You're meant to represent parties full of activists. You're also meant to represent voters, and there is no connection.
Naomi, you're going to have to talk us out the programme.
Reform UK have got 160 seats left to fill.
Will you stop the wrong people?
I'm not sorry. There's nothing to do with you.
Good.
No, 160 seats still left to select. Will they put candidates up against all of the Conservatives, or will there be some kind of unofficial alliance between them?
Well, they've ruled that out. And that's all we have time for. I did say talk out of the programme, and you did, Naomi. From all to say, I'll be back tomorrow. Bye.